I'd like to give a special shout out to all my patrons, my wildlings, knights watching Kingsguard. My Kingsguard include Brendan, Nick, Oscar, Stuart, Josephine, Ikaika, Amanda, RJ, Shad, Nicoletta, Tanner, Jennifer, Sarah, Pat, Kevin, Ryan, Michael, Terrence, Wade, Darren, FM, Derry, and Boss. Thank you all so much. You're the best.
Welcome back to the Fantasy Network, everyone. My name is, of course, Jimmy Nuts, and today we're going to be reviewing Book 2 in the Sun Eater series, which is Howling Dark by Christopher Ruocchio. The covers of the series continue to blow me away, as well as the story in between the cover and the back page. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. Don't worry, this is going to have a small no-spoiler section at the beginning here, and then I will go into spoilers and let you know whenever that's happening so you don't spoil yourself or anything. But the reason why I wanted to do a non-spoiler section for Book 2 is simply because I think a lot of people are questioning, should I dive into this? I see a lot of people saying, I might get to it, and I need to express to people who have not read Book 1 in non-spoiler terms just how amazing I think this book is. And I know some people don't love having sequels be non-spoiler, but it's going to be a small part of this video just to say that I personally loved Empire of Silence. I loved Book 1. Book 2 blows it out of the water. Like, it's a whole notch above, in my opinion. And that's something that I've seen very consistent. I said this in my last video for Empire of Silence, is that even people who didn't love or maybe even didn't like Book 1 seem to all unanimously agree that Book 2 is better. And I gotta say, as someone who loved Book 1, I love this book even more. It's making me wish I had more stars to give, out of 5. I wish I could go to maybe 5.5 or 6. But at the end of the day, what this book did is expand on a lot of things that I did enjoy in Book 1, but also took us to a totally different realm of the universe and of Hadrian as a character and this chronicled tale that we're getting from Christopher Ruocchio. This is maybe my favorite science fiction book that I've read. And I know it's sci-fantasy, but just like everything about this book kind of quieted the inner critic in my head. When I think about these videos, I start talking about like what's a pro and what's a con. That got to the wayside. And I found myself just reading and experiencing, which is by far, at least in my opinion, I think for yours too, would be the best value for my dollar and for my time. Whenever I can just turn off and not have to worry that the author's going to make a big blunder or anything like that, and trust them and be in the story, it is something special. Howling Dark just flew by. This is a book that I could easily read a ton of pages in and not realize time was flying by. And those books are special. So I think Howling Dark is special. I think Sun Eater is special. And it's crazy to think that I hear Book 3 is even better. But for Howling Dark being a second entry, some of the things that I think that really upped was the fact that Hadrian got more complex. And yes, Hadrian can be a little bit melodramatic, and I roll my eyes at it sometimes, but it's so tongue-in-cheek because Hadrian knows that he is melodramatic. His teachers know that he's melodramatic, and you see that play out here. But Hadrian has a new take on some age-old questions in Howling Dark, which is, do you sacrifice some to save the many? How far does that branch extend out for responsibility for massive repercussions of actions? Just things that have been asked tons of times in history, but have a fresh spin on them here in Howling Dark. And I think that's going to continue to be a thing that we see in Sun Eater as we keep going. And we hear about some of the things transpiring, right, in the further outreaches of the universe, but we actually see the impact of some of those attacks and things. I won't say too much, but we actually see what that looks like. And to get the kind of general overview in Book 1 and then Book 2 to deliver on that is awesome. But Christopher Ruocchio's descriptions are so vivid and paint such a great picture. And as a non-visual reader, I don't imagine a lot of images in my head when I read. I felt like I was in a high-budget sci-fi movie, and I could see some of these things starting to pop in my head, which is a huge indicator that I'm meshing with the writing style here. Those vivid descriptions play into world building. They fit. The word choice makes sense here. It also has great metaphors that make sense within the world building and then remind you of some of the terms that you need to keep your eye on. George Martin does this a lot in A Song of Ice and Fire. The in-world terms make a lot of sense. They don't pull me out. They don't sound lame. They fit and they work. And part of that has to do with the fact that it is our universe we're in, even though it's 20,000 years in the future. And as we go on this adventure in Book 2 and it continues to expand, we also get a lot of philosophical questions, kind of like how I mentioned before, but those all stem from the relationships that Hadrian had in Book 1, and we could have just moved past that. and had a new entry, new things to do. But everything that was built upon in book one, it continues to build here. The relationships matter, folks, and that means everything, because I think whenever you can flesh out your side characters, especially from a first-person perspective, that's where you get that really rich, lived-in experience with a book. And I really want to read, I'm opening up the book because I want to read these last few lines. And this is non-spoiler, it's just the end of a random chapter. And I could have done this, listen, I could read all of the chapter endings in this book, in Howling Dark specifically, and they're all home runs, because Christopher Ruocchio might be the best chapter ender in the game today. Like, I don't care what genre. His chapter endings are so impactful and make you want to pick up the next chapter, but also marinate and think about what you were just told. Just absolutely astounding. And this is one of the ones that I really enjoyed from earlier in the book. It says, "But the ugliness of the world does not fade, and fear and grief are not made less by time. We are only made stronger. We can only float together on their tides as otters do, hand in hand, before it ends, before it has to end." And that, I think everyone can agree that's a pretty cool ending to a chapter, but then whenever you have the context when you're reading through this, it's really going to mean a lot. And that is one that echoed through my brain until all the way to the end of this book. And the last really non-spoiler thing is, I felt like Ruocchio started to trust the reader a lot more in book two. So if you felt like book one was just kind of a chronicling tale, you've seen it done before, whole bunch of new ideas happen. A lot more mysteries are given to you. But even the beginning of this book kind of throws you in the deep end. You're coming out of fugue. You're going to have to piece some things together. And I happen to like that challenge as a reader. And I was really excited to see that starting off in Howling Dark, thinking I know what was going to happen and just being like, oh, wait, this is not how this book was going to start in my head. So the fact that he has a little bit of a leash with us as a reader tells me that the future entries of this, and you can see it in Howling Dark, we are going to have to do some figuring out. So yes, this sequel, Howling Dark, super engaging, brand new ideas. If you felt like you had maybe seen this done before in Empire of Silence, I would really challenge you to pick up Howling Dark. And if you haven't tried them at all, I think you should start Sun Eater. I love this. This could end up being my favorite sci-fi of all time. That's how much I really enjoy this. This may be the best book I've read so far this year. We're still really early in the year, but I am just enthralled in this world, and I really love it, and I love the ideas that are being explored here, and I hear book three is even better, which is astounding to me, because this is a book I could not put down. So this is going to be it for you if you're only here for the non-spoiler section of this review. I'm just going to kind of react to some of the wild things that happen in this book, and I'll leave you with this. I do think it's important to have a connection to Hadrian for these books to work for you, as it always is the case with a first-person narrative. I happen to connect with Hadrian quite a bit. You are going to have some downtime with Hadrian in book two. You are going to have some of those slower, thoughtful moments, but those are the moments, I think, when you look back on a series that you're enjoying and a character you connected with, those are the moments you miss the most, is whenever you're sitting in their head and they're in their bed and thinking about the day or the events to come. And I think the slower moments in this book are actually just as rich and amazing as some of the most ridiculous climax pieces that you'll see today in fiction. So that's what I'll leave you with. I would challenge you to connect with Hadrian if you can. And if it was almost there for you in book one, I think book two is without a doubt a step up in every sense of the word, sense of the term. I really do, and I hope that you would check it out. But we are going to now talk some actual spoilers. So if you're leaving the video, hit like and subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll see you in the next one. For everybody else that has read Howling Dark, all right, let's talk about some of this stuff. But Bordelon, immediately, when we open up this book and we're trying to figure out what's happened since he's been in this deep freeze and fugue, I'm like, well, what happened with Bordelon? We're only getting little context clues here and there. Did he really betray Hadrian? What was the catalyst to all this? But also, like, what's going to happen now? Because it seems to haunt Hadrian quite a bit. So that was something out of the gate that I loved. And then we had the Painted Man, which some people were waiting on that reaction as I was reading into my Discord. What a horrifying description. When I was talking to No Spoiler about how vivid the descriptions are, this is what I was thinking about. The Painted Man is terrifying, especially the teeth and the clown-like lips, all of this stuff. And I kind of forget that the homunculi, if I'm saying that right, just how human they can be, but also just how different they are. And it was a great introduction to the Extrastellarians. I thought that that was excellently done. The dinner battle scene was awesome. Like, I kind of thought of the Dune dinner scene, but this is like totally different in a lot of ways. And then you have all the AI, like the Somme army, which are the daemons. Is it daemons or demons? Because the audiobook basically says demons, which I thought was interesting. Let me know down in the comments if I'm pronouncing that right. I think the audiobook would be correct. By the way, the audio for this is astounding. But that dinner battle scene was so wild and horrifying and so sad. When Ghem dies, I felt that in my heart. This is a character that at the beginning of this book, I'm like, you know what? I like this guy. I'm glad that he's here. Things that help round out Hadrian, and he's dead. And it hurt. It sucked. And Hadrian took all of that blame. And it was tough to experience. I was surprised by how much I reacted to that death. And Gem is just like one example of where these side characters are starting to really round out in their quality. And that's what I need from a first-person perspective, because even though I love being in Hadrian's head, same thing with Fitz in Farseer and beyond, really the surrounding characters are some of my favorite characters ever, and that's an impressive thing to do from the first-person perspective. So Gem hurt. It hurt bad. And in the no spoiler section, I was talking about how relationships in the past, I couldn't say it, but now I can say it now to all my spoiler folks. Gibson is all over this book, is he not? And yeah, it's one of those things where you can see that he's still having an effect. And there's a section about grief and education that I thought was just stupendous. And it's nice to see that a character that was gone so soon in the books is still paying off in dividends. And Gibson is maybe my favorite part about Hadrian, and I think maybe Hadrian's favorite part of himself and everything that he learned from Gibson. And I wanted to read a section here that I thought was just excellent from chapter 9. It's I think it's titled Absent Friends, and he's thinking about Gem's death and how it impacted him and how his legend is growing, which really Howling Dark's where we start to see that legend really building. And it says, better the reassuring fable than the clinical truth. Fables are more real than reality. Such are your stories about me, many of which I began knowing the power of stories as I do. I could not have made peace at the Battle of Aptuca years later if my legend were not more true than myself. By this fact of human nature and belief, we are made larger than ourselves. Some better, some worse, some only more complicated. Thus 2 and 2 is made 5, and so we grow beyond ourselves. That is, I think of like Napoleon, just like Arthur, like all the legends and great generals that have accomplished these big feats, and you just know all these stories. Caesar, right? Man, the callbacks in history to this and how true that is really resonates with me, especially as someone that really loves history. But that was so powerful. And this and then the quote I said in the no spoiler section, these are in the first 10 chapters of this book. This is an absolute certified banger of a book. Can you tell I love it? I feel like I'm ranting a bit. I'm just fired up about this a lot. And, Hadrian betrays Basander and Janan, and it's a rough moment. It's sad. And it's like one of those things where you look at both sides. Even Basander and Janan, like you look and you say, I don't know if anyone could have, you can't really blame them for what they're doing. They're in a certain role or a certain position and making those decisions, and it's sad. But I will say, Hadrian's a bit self-righteous. However, to defend him immediately, because I love Hadrian, no one has seen what he saw in those caves back in book 1. He saw it. No one wants to believe him. He doesn't even want to talk about it. So he has information that no one else seems to have. So it does make him seem a little self-righteous, but we as the reader then have to think back and say, well, he has the vision. But at this point in the book, obviously later we can blame Basander for a lot. But at this point, when he betrays Basander, it was a little bit sad, I will say. And Hadrian's making difficult decisions all throughout this book, and then one that he's really struggling with is whenever they want his blood, right? And he's talking about giving his blood and what they will do with the clones, the spawns from his blood. And it raises a good question as we go into the new age or whatever, but I think of kind of like deep fakes. You can literally make things, people look like they're saying things they're not saying, and it is almost a 1-for-1. It's only going to get better as we go on in life, right? So I kind of felt like there was a good comparison there. But Hadrian's wondering, is he responsible then for the things of his blood and what they go and do? I mean, it's like children, if your child grows up to be a criminal or do some awful things, how responsible are you of your spawn like that? Now I think cloning is a bit different because it's literally replications of him. and that will definitely get put on him because he's the face of that action. But I just thought that was a really cool, complex question that was compelling to think over and mull on. And my favorite part about Sun Eater right now is actually the quiet and the deep and all these mysteries about like what are these things. I thought the whole Oracle chapter was just outstanding. Like, I've captivated on the page. I'm in it. Your past is broken. What does that mean? What does that mean for Hadrian? And these are the questions that I think that, like, when I think about this series and why I love it so much, these are the things I want to talk to you about in the comments. Like, this is the things that we need to discuss going forward. Now, I know book 3's out, so you might have some answers I don't. Don't tell me in the comments. I'm going to read that very, very soon. We also get a really cool tidbit. Like, we start seeing beings that have been alive for like 700 and 800 years, right? Because they're like constantly transplanting their consciousness into new bodies and brains, all this crazy stuff. And Baron's song tells us, even though I've been alive for 700 to 800 years, I don't have memories from everything. And I thought that was a really neat limitation that Ruocchio put on this cool piece of tech and piece of world building. And then it makes you wonder, like, what are the implications then if you forget certain things and how you got there? Just a really neat piece of world building that I liked. And then we get to Sagara, who's a legend, right? Sagara in his little garden with all these children. It feels like the Garden of Eden, which I'm all for biblical undertones. I think that stuff's like slightly creepy, but also cool. I will say this. This is the one thing that kind of took me out of the book just for a second. And it was like... Whenever Hadrian met Brethren, and he said, well, I was from San Francisco, and it's like, oh man, really? Like, I'm in development, so like to me, like San Francisco is almost like a meme in the development world, Silicon Valley and all this stuff. So it's like, I'm just imagining like dudes microdosing like LSD, creating this thing that's amazing, like Brethren. So to me, like being close to the development cycles, I guess I just was like, oh man, that's kind of cheesy. Not that it's bad, but as a developer, I laughed for some reason. Also, I have to say, Brethren, super interesting, but the Americani, we get told that they had all this ancient technology, da-da-da-da-da. It never even dawned on me, I'm such an idiot, that the Americani are probably Americans, like Americana. Like, I'm assuming that those are the remnants of San Francisco and the Americans, and I just never even put it together just because, like, it's presented as this, like, almost like an elder species or race, and that they're responsible for all this really, really amazing technology that we see like Sagara using and everything. And I never pieced that together, and I feel really dumb now. And pretty much as soon as Basander left the story, I knew he'd be back. I actually thought it might not happen in this book, but not the fact that he's back's not surprising. It's the fact that Sagara brought Basander back was really shocking to me. And then Switch betrayal in this moment, like we find out Switch is the one that sent the message, but he was allowed to send the message from like Brethren, which is really interesting. But I kind of saw the Switch betrayal coming, to be honest. Like whenever Hadrian's like overhearing the conversation Switch is having and he sounds like he's doubting Hadrian, I think it's to display, like I'm not mad that it was predictable, but I think it was to display the fact that Hadrian is so out of touch right now because he's kind of out of his mind, having to deal with all this stuff and being down there with Sagara. I mean, literally seeing like a legend come to life, which is pretty wild. But yeah, I thought that was predictable but good, and then seeing Basander back due to Sagara is wild. But man, the Janan reunion was cold, real cold for my boy Hadrian. And we like see the deal there, and they're talking about like I think it's like 20,000 of these people waiting to get into the colony are going to be handed over to the Sealson to be slaves. Could you imagine coming out of like a deep, like if I come out of a deep sleep in a place that I'm not used to staying, I freak out. Could you imagine waking up from 20,000 years being or 20,000 people, I'm sorry, being frozen over a period of time and waking up and you're a slave to an alien race that your own species traded you off to? That would be horrifying and frightening. The climax of this book is absolutely outstanding. Basander killing, the Undying died. Basander kills Sagara, and you're like, wait, what? And they order to blow up the Sealson ship. We're going to see the repercussions of that for books to come. But on top of that, I got to say, Rain Smythe, which I want to say Smith, but the audiobook says Smythe. Rain Smythe's death, another one kind of like Gem that crept up on me. I was sad to see it happen. And that whole hostage situation was so excellently done. Like the scene kind of slows down and it's all through that dialogue. And I just thought that Christopher Ruocchio wrote the shit out of those scenes, if I can be honest with you. He just wrote it to a T. The tension was there. It was palpable. And seeing Hadrian take the dive into killing the kid. The kid's name is, if I can see it in my notes, Nebuda. That is a line you can never come back across. And Hadrian obviously knows that. But I am terrified for what implications that's going to have on Hadrian as a human being going forward. I could not believe what I was reading at the end of Howling Dark. Like, I could not process what was happening with Arenata chopping off Hadrian's arm. And you're like, oh, that's not good. I wonder who's going to save him. And then chopping off his head. Then only to find out that the Gibson image we've been seeing all along is the Quiet. What? The Quiet is so interesting. I love it. Also, great name. But they tell him that he must live. And it seems like maybe the Quiet's living, like they're able to exist as long as Hadrian lives or something. I don't need the answers to this, but these are like all things that I'm processing as I'm reading this and losing my mind, like standing up as I read. But Hadrian's back. He looks in the water and I think like his opposite arm is gone or something. There was a little detail there that I got a little confused on, but he comes back and kills Arenata. Amazing. And Volca is okay, and I need to just take a second here to break and tell you I love Volca. It would be a crime of me not to tell you how much I love not just Volca, but Volca's relationship to Hadrian and the role she plays in this story. Volca is like probably like a top 10 side character for me at this point. I would like to see more of Volca. I'd be okay if she was a POV one day. That's how much I love Volca. I love Volca almost as much as Hadrian. I keep thinking like, don't let anything happen. And thankfully, Hadrian was able to protect her here, or I would have lost my mind because I was already freaking out that, Hadrian got his head chopped off. Like, you think your main character's safe. Not in Christopher Ruoccio's world. Suzua and Ren are now like hosting Sagara Reincarnated, but it's split between two. I don't know if it'll become one. We'll have to see what happens there, but we see Hadrian knighted. And now, at the end of Howling Dark, we've seen the pebbles falling, and now the boulder comes down. We are seeing a legend in the making, folks. And some of the crucial details missing, like the fact that Hadrian did stab Arenata in the back, which is fine. I'm cool with Arenata going down. All team Hadrian. But that detail's left out, and it's like, oh, he went to single-hand combat with Arenata the Prince, all this craziness. And, those details are left out, but the legend is building, and it's becoming bigger than him. And in the quote I read earlier talking about how fable is bigger than clinical truths, and that is on display here. And that theme echoes throughout this book, and I assume will continue on into book 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever it's going to be. And those are kind of my reactions. I know I didn't get every detail. I couldn't, or this video would be an hour long. This book rocked. This book absolutely ruled. Like I said, it's probably the best book I've read this year. Probably my favorite sci-fi book of all time now. Like, it's close, and I just can't express how jaw-dropping I found the conclusion of this to be, and how close it could have been to being ridiculous or taking me out of the moment, but it never did. Ruoccio's writing is silky smooth, just silky smooth. He never gets in his own way, and the story here has opened up into a vast, just melting pot of opportunities and world building that I cannot wait to continue. I've had to keep myself from starting Demon in White, but I'll be reading that at the beginning of March, and then I'll be reading book 4 upon release, and I'll read book 5 when that releases in December. Sun Eater is dope. It is awesome. It's phenomenal, and Christopher Ruocchio is becoming one of my favorite authors. Feels so good to just rant, and this is one of those things where I'm sure there's things people could find that maybe aren't great or whatever, but my experience is so pure and so much fun that I'm just happy to be reading these books. So that is my total thoughts on Howling Dark. Maybe I'll have a discussion before the 4th book comes out. I don't know how time's going to permit, but I'm definitely going to be continuing reading this, and I plan on be talking to Christopher Ruocchio in the coming, probably the coming weeks on Chatting with Nuts, which is going to be really amazing, and I hope people will come out for that. We're going to pick about his brain, not just about Sun Eater, but also everything in the genre and about writing, which I think is really awesome. He's clearly a student of the game and is standing on the shoulders of giants, and he's paying homage, sometimes on the nose, sometimes subtly, but I like all of it. And I'm fired up. I'm really fired up. Hey, thanks for watching this video. If you like it, hit like. If you dislike it, hit dislike. If you love it, think about subscribing. There's a Patreon in the description. Optional, but always appreciated. Until I see you next time, be good, be safe, and remember to always keep turning the page.